Good evening and welcome once again to Commander's Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, where we talk all things on and off the field about our beloved Washington Commanders. And after a short hiatus last week due to some work scheduling, we're back once again. We're going to have an action-packed episode here tonight as we got about 6-7 things to talk about, some off-the-field news, some on-the-field news, a couple recaps from last week. We're going to have a preview of this coming weekend's game that got flexed to Sunday afternoon against the Dallas Cowboys with a special guest. Then we're going to talk some 2024 early draft items. And then, of course, as you know, we wind down knowing that next week, this coming weekend is week 18. This time next week, we will have encountered the notorious, infamous Black Monday, as it's known around the NFL, where coaching vacancies are put on a board like a bingo machine. We're going to talk about that too and what implications that might have for our beloved Commanders. But first, as we always do on every weekly episode, we kind of start with some off-the-field news. And let me tell you, with new ownership, with a losing season, with player opinions, drama, and we're going to get into some of player opinions later on, there's no shortage of off-the-field news, right? But one thing that kind of popped out in the last week, actually a week and a half since I've been off, since our last episode 2 weeks ago, was the fact that the Commanders, and we also know that Josh Harris also owns the 76ers and New Jersey Devils, as well as a Premier League soccer team as well. But majority owner Josh Harris and Dave Blitzer, who own the Harris Blitzer Entertainment Group, I think is their official title. They actually acquired a majority stake in a youth sports complex at the Hall of Fame Village in Canton, Ohio. And this 115-acre youth sports complex is pretty impressive. It's just another facet of Canton, Ohio, along with the Hall of Fame and the Hall of Fame Stadium, where they play the Hall of Fame game every year in conjunction with the Hall of Fame induction in August. And what kind of jumps out, not necessarily the fact that they, acquired a majority stake in this sports complex. Okay. There's thousands of them across the country and every state, yada, yada, yada. But it's kind of two things. A, the fact that it is Josh Harris and David Blitzer, the entertainment partners who own, overwhelming majority of so many teams across professional sports. But it's also the first large investment non-NFL team for Josh Harris, right? And what do I mean by that? So we know that Josh Harris and company have dumped money into FedEx Field until, the new stadium project gets underway, where the location's decided, what they're going to build, yada, yada, yada. We know that with some certainty, but not necessarily confirmed, there's going to be a new training complex coming, probably in Ashburn or wherever they decide to build the new stadium. More than likely, it's going to stay in Ashburn, especially if they decide to go back to RFK complex, because there's just not enough space at RFK to do the stadium and a practice facility. So he's definitely, him and his partners are actually kicking money into the team itself to try and bring that up to snuff and, kind of bring it away and out of the Dan Snyder era, as we kind of know that it declined during the latter half of his ownership, right? But what this does is this is first major move for Josh Harris as an NFL owner to other NFL owners and the public at large, right? So this shows that, not only is Josh Harris invested in his own team, which he's done here over the last 6 to 7 months through the regular season and preseason since he took ownership this past July. It also kind of signifies to the other owners and the public at large that, hey, look, I'm an owner. I'm not only invested in my team, but I want to be invested in the league. I want to be invested in growing the game, to the public, to the kids, yada, yada, yada. So, like I said, they acquired this large 115-acre youth sports complex that actually sits inside of the Hall of Fame Village in Canton, Ohio. But it's certainly interesting that over the last year, the same entertainment group, the Harris Blitzer Group, actually heavily invested across basically a youth sports industry, as we like to say it. Hey, Dave, what's up? Welcome. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We're going to be talking about your boys and the Commanders here a little bit later on in the show. So, sit down, buckle up, and have some fun, because Lord knows we're going to be throwing some jabs at each other across the waves here. But as I was saying, looking at over the last year, this Harris Blitzer Group heavily invested across basically all of the youth sports industry, right? And what do I mean by that is, basically they acquired or put a large investment into the Ripken Baseball League and Corporation, the Cooperstown All-Star Baseball Village, which is kind of the same setup as Canton, Ohio, and the NFL Hall of Fame. An outfit called We Are Camp, as well as the Hall of Fame Village, which is Canton, Ohio itself. And basically, by them acquiring the 80% stake that, they did for the youth sports complex in the Hall of Fame Village, basically comes out to $10 million for an 80% stake. So it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but it, on paper and just the thought process of it, it says, hey, these guys are, want to be invested in sports. They want to be invested in youth sports, youth activity, growing different sports, whether it's baseball, basketball, football, everything that basically they have a part ownership in. And it's a pretty cool idea, and just kind of shows, another part of the diversity of Josh Harris and company as the Commanders owners, just to kind of not be solely focused on the Commanders at hand, but also kind of being able to tackle some other issues and opportunities as they pop up around the league, to show the league that, look, I'm here to stay. I'm in it for the long haul, good or bad. And we know that this year, unfortunately, is bad, and kind of where we go from there. So, just something that, real quick, it shows that Josh Harris is going to end up doing what he needs to do to make things happen across the league. As Paul chimes in, he goes, will the new stadium be a taxpayer issue as well as this new facility for the Harris Group, or just a Harris expense? So it's kind of a two-part question, right? The youth sports complex through the Hall of Fame group is actually going to be a private expense for the Harris Blitzer Entertainment Group. It won't be taxpayer funded. It won't be tied to taxpayer funds. It's basically a private investment. People like, Harris Blitzer Entertainment Group, NFL owners, blah, 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 blah. The stadium deal, I think at some point in time, once they get to the point of picking a site and working out what jurisdiction they're going to be in, I think that it's not going to be strictly all private like some of the more recent stadiums have been in the NFL, or soon to be built stadiums in the NFL, kind of like with Buffalo or Dallas or things of that, or even Los Angeles, so to speak. But I think in order to work out the package to entice the team to come to that particular jurisdiction, there's going to have to be some kind of either tax incentives or a combination of, which is probably more likely the combination of tax incentives and taxpayer funds. I think those taxpayer funds would probably be capped somewhere like in the $400 to $500 million range, knowing that, hey, look, a new stadium is probably going to be somewhere like $1.5 billion to $2 billion, more than likely, especially in the DC area. Would not be surprised if that stadium comes in at $2 billion plus. So, I think each jurisdiction, Maryland, Virginia, and the district, are going to do their hardest to limit the amount of taxpayer funds that are going directly to that project, which is why I think you're going to see it probably heavily tax incentive laden project. But there'll also be, some contribution, let's be honest, right? But we all know that, in a highly political environment that we are in the DMV, it's going to be, the politicians are going to be pressed by their constituents to limit the amount of money that goes into that project, especially when you don't have a winning field on the team. So it'll be that's something interesting to see. That I think will pick up steam once we get done the current season that we're in, and kind of moving forward with the different legislation that's out there and what affects the stadium deals. Hey, Stacy, thank you for checking in. Hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully you had a good holiday season. And, as Paul says, I think a dome would be nice. Maybe a future Super Bowl. Exactly. We, the Cowboys, play better indoors for the future. Ain't that the truth? I think looking at the big picture, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people that want an open stadium. However, I think, look, what drives the stadium deal is money, right? So the more events, the more bigger events that you can do at your stadium, the better off the ownerships are going to be, right? So what does that mean? That means Super Bowl. That means more concerts. That means more other, bigger events. FedEx Field, as shitty as that stadium is, and they're pumping some money into it just to kind of put the 3 to 4 year band-aid on it as we speak. But every year they do a Premier League soccer friendly, I guess you call it. They do a rugby friendly. Next year, the Army Navy game is going to be at FedEx Field in 2024. There's concerts throughout the season, like to the tune of like Kenny Chesney, Luke Combs, Beyonce, you name it, like the big headliners still are coming to FedEx Field. So I think you need to go with a dome so that way it can accommodate events 365 days out of the year. The biggest one being the Super Bowl. Look, let's be honest, you're not even going to be entertained into the Super Bowl rotation unless it's a dome. Now, the way you could possibly get around a dome-ish stadium and still kind of have that outdoor feel is if you do something like SoFi, right? SoFi is a covered stadium, but it's open on the sides and around the tops of the concourse. So you're still going to have the cold air coming in, in December and January. But, you're not going to have the snow, you're not going to have the rain and stuff like that, so it's something that kind of still gives an outdoorish feel, but isn't completely indoors, so to speak. I would be down for that if, in fact, they don't go the whole strictly dome route where it's completely closed in. But, we'll end up seeing what happens and kind of what they come up with. Look, as long as they pick the right site, it's easily accessible, and the fan experience is 10 times above what it is now, you're not going to hear a complaint out of me. And maybe, just maybe, depending on the timing and where it is and the incentives, they might just swing another season ticket holder back into the fold, but that remains to be seen. So as I said, hey, look, last week I was off because of work, so we weren't able to conduct the show last Tuesday evening. So real quick, we'll look at what happened on Christmas Eve on Sunday, December 24th. As everybody knows, hey, look, our team is terrible. I mean, look, back then we were sitting at 4-11, taking on the New York Jets. A lot of talk going into that game. Was Aaron Rodgers going to play? Was Aaron Rodgers not going to play? He was medically cleared into his 21-day window. And, looking at what he puts on social media, whether he puts it on Twitter, whether he puts it on, TikTok, whatever he's on, as well as his weekly appearance on the Pat McAfee show on ESPN, Rodgers is saying, hey, look, I'm not 100%. I'm not sure where people think that I'm going to be 100%. The only reason that people think I may have a chance to play or want to play is because the Jets officially opened up that 21-day window where he has the potential to come back. And, if they don't make that decision by a certain time, then the team has to put him on IR for the remainder of the season, which in all honesty was only like another 2 games afterwards. So, if they didn't think he was going to be able to go, then like, why even start the storyline of Rodgers coming back, right? Not 100% sure what that was about, but, it kind of is what it is. So, lo and behold, we kind of go out, and it was interesting that leading up to the Jets game, there was a poll kind of floating around on social media amongst the Washington faithful that said, hey, look, what would be your preference of this game? And in no particular order, the choices were like, hey, we beat the Jets. Choice number 2 was we get blown out by the Jets. Number 3 was, I think, we squeak a victory. Number 4 was like we fight hard and lose like a close battle, something like that. As luck would have it, we came out with number 4. We lost to the New York Jets 30-28. Actually culminated with a benching of Sam Howell in the fourth quarter and backup quarterback Jacoby Brissett coming in, who basically lit up the field, going 10 for 13 for 100 yards and 1 touchdown to Terry McLaurin. And, look, the Jets and their carousel quarterbacks, let's just play the music, strike up the band, go to the carnival. And look, Trevor Siemian was the lucky one that came off the carousel and decided to play the entire game against Washington. And he went 27 for 49, 217, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Basically did what he had to do enough to pull out the victory against Washington. What was interesting was, as I said, once the decision was made to bench Sam Howell and bring Jacoby Brissett in, and then Jacoby basically lit it up for 2 drives, bringing the Commanders within striking distance of the New York Jets, to the point that, we had a potential to win at the end of the game. Then the discussion begins in the DC area, and if you are even remotely tied to the DMV or, social media, you probably saw it, who's going to start New Year's Eve against the 49ers. Excuse me. Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett. Why does, or how has Howell been struggling so much with this offense, with this offensive line and everything else under the sun? And Jacoby Brissett can come in for 2 straight drives, go right down the field, score a touchdown on both of them, or lead the team to 2 touchdowns and, kind of rally the team with that same offense. So it's kind of super interesting how that debate kind of came around. And, there's a lot of talk about, between the Howell faithful and, of course, the Howell haters, hey, look, if Brissett started the majority of the season, or if sooner in the season we'd be in the playoffs, just let Howell finish out the season. Both sides of the battle are going at it pretty hard. But it was nice to see in that game against the Jets, Terry McLaurin basically have kind of a rebound game. Look, he wasn't his normal self shooting, getting, balls thrown at him for about 100 yards, but he did have in the last 2 drives with Brissett, especially, he had 3 receptions for 50 yards in the game, and all 3 of those came in the last 4 minutes of the game with Jacoby Brissett. And a lot of people were wondering, hey, look, why was McLaurin able to flourish in the offensive system with Brissett and not Howell? Does that mean that Howell is, basically not doing what he needs to do? Is he not, seeing the field? Is he not making progressions? Is he not, able to hit the guys when he needs to? What's going on? So, it's definitely been a conversation that, even up and through this week here, when we played the 49ers, has continued, because as we're going to get to, Jacoby Brissett wasn't available to play against the 49ers, so Sam Howell got another start. But, hey, look, that whole game, at least for the first half, was basically all Jets. And, in all honesty, other than a Chris Rodriguez 12-yard touchdown run, halftime was 27-7. And, like I said, I think that's kind of when, things, I don't know really what you're saving. What you're saving, are you saving face? Are you trying to get an offensive spark for a season that's been lost anyhow? I'm not exactly sure what is going on, but the coaching staff, for whatever reason, between Ron Rivera and EB, decided to make the quarterback change at halftime. And, like I said, they put Brissett in. So, Brissett had a touchdown to Logan Thomas. And with 2 deep bombs that kind of set up on each drive, set up the touchdowns on both drives, to Terry McLaurin, and then as well as the fourth quarter touchdowns between Rodriguez and Gibson. And basically, look, for whatever reason, whether it was the Jets stumbling, our defense kind of figuring things out, I don't know. I'm not going to read into it. It is what it is. But the defense was able to come out. Our defense was able to come out in the second half and hold the Jets to 1 field goal. And, we made it respectable, and we came out 28-30. And I'll be honest with you that, even going into that game, there are a lot of fans that wanted to protect the number 4 draft pick and basically lose. Basically, let's be honest, they wanted to tank to at least protect that draft pick or move up. And as funny as it was, that as a result of that game, along with some other game results as well, we actually moved up to 3rd for the 2024 draft, which we're going to talk about later on tonight. So, it is what it is. We had our flares of greatness. We had our, typical, beating our head against the wall with Sam Howell and his mistakes and inconsistencies, right? I don't want to say poor play. I don't want to say, unprepared, whatever. Let's just call it as inconsistent play. So as Paul Spencer says, hey, look, I think Jacoby brings a bigger stature at quarterback. He's tall. Yes, he is taller than Sam Howell, to sit in the pocket, and he's mobile too. Definitely can use his feet a little bit better, brings his big arm as well. So they have a lot of the same characteristics, right, between Brissett and Howell. Height, arm strength, a little bit mobility, and actually Brissett's probably a little bit more mobile than Sam Howell. But one of the things that, you can't really put a number, or in some ways you can put a value on it, so to speak, is experience, right? And that's something that Brissett brings. Look, Brissett might not be the top 15 NFL quarterback, might not be leading teams to the playoffs or the Super Bowl, but he'll give you some solid NFL quarterback experience. And look, the guy will probably get you a 500 record or maybe slightly better. So, I think Brissett definitely brings a lot more value than just a backup quarterback, so to speak. Obviously, he's not your long-term answer for sustainability and, hey, I want to be a perennial playoff contender and even challenge for a Super Bowl. But he's definitely a good short gap. I don't want to say project, but a good short gap piece until you can get the quarterback that you need. Now, whether or not that is Sam Howell remains to be seen. And, unfortunately, and we'll talk about it here as we get closer to the end of the show, but, the more we play, the more what may happen next Monday. It definitely looks like Sam Howell's days as starting quarterback, I'll use that keyword starting, could be numbered once we get out of the 2023 season and 2023-24 season and go into the first full season under the new ownership group. So then, of course, as we know, on New Year's Eve, this past Sunday, December 31st, San Francisco 49ers, along with some Commanders alumni, most notably Trent Williams and Chase Young, traveled east to FedEx Field to take on the Washington Commanders. Now, look, we knew that after what happened to the San Francisco 49ers on Christmas Eve, and knowing that, just the offensive juggernaut and just the all-around overall great team that the 49ers are, and how bad we suck, we kind of knew that this was going to be, A loss, and B, kind of had the potential to be a lopsided loss. And of course that didn't, it kind of held true, right? As the 49ers beat us 27-10. Look, Sam Howell actually got the start. The only reason Sam Howell got the start in this game was because on Thursday, after practice or during practice, Brissett went to the coaches and medical staff, said, hey, look, something's wrong with my hamstring. I'm not exactly sure what. He didn't think it was torn, definitely pulled, that kind of deal. And, between the grades and numbers that they try to give that crap along with like strains and sprains, it came to the point where they were like, hey, look, give it till Friday, see how you do. And if not, then how's it going to start? Friday rolls around. It's no go. So basically they put Brissett inactive, signed Jake from State Farm, who played his college ball at Georgia, to the active squad as the backup quarterback to fill in, back up Sam Howell on Sunday against the 49ers. And Sam Howell got the start. Now, Sam Howell kind of did what Sam Howell does, especially against the elite defense of the 49ers. And, he went 17 for 28, 169, one touchdown. And of course, he had Sam Howell with 2 interceptions. B-Rob came back, first game back off of injury, did B-Rob things, had 9 carries for 44 yards. And something you like to see, it's probably a little too late, too soon, too late type of deal that, wasn't more consistent over the season as it should have been. But Terry McLaurin, was basically your leading receiver, 4 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Love to see that number up around triple digits where it should be. But hey, for him to have, 60 plus yards in consecutive weeks and be the leading receiver for the team as a team captain, that's kind of what I want to see, right? And, look, we kind of knew what was going to happen, but all 10 of our points came in the first half. Field goal and that McLaurin touchdown. We just really couldn't do anything, get anything going in the second half at all. And luckily, we only held San Francisco to 2 touchdowns in the second half. San Francisco had the opportunity to kind of blow it open, so to speak. And, Brock Purdy did what Brock Purdy had to do, and he played a really good rebound game after the dismal performance the week before. And Purdy went 22 for 28 for 230 and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's basically the stat line that we needed to have Sam Howell have, right? 200, 250 yards passing, couple touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And, unfortunately, we get the Sam Howell that was a little more inconsistent with only 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. So, it's super interesting that, look, in last week's game against the 49ers, here it was, in the first half when Sam Howell had his 2 interceptions, and, Grant Paulson from 106.7 The Fan here in DC said, hey, look, Sam Howell's throwing 2 picks and basically had a third interception dropped by the San Francisco defense. And it gave Sam Howell an NFL high 19 pickoffs across the season so far. And it was interesting that, he also noted, Grant actually also noted that Rex Grossman is the only quarterback to throw for 20 interceptions for the Washington franchise since Jay Schrader did it in 1986. So then somebody's like, hey, look, what's Grossman doing these days? Is Grossman available to play for us next week against the Dallas Cowboys? Just kind of been one of those years with Sam Howell. And we knew going into the season, especially at the beginning of the season, that it was going to be a roller coaster. And boy, has it been a roller coaster with Sam Howell, right? You're going to get a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe even a month of solid quarterback play. Get some decent yards, minimal turnovers, had a shit ton of sacks throughout the entire season, even up to like halfway, just past the first Philadelphia game, and then we made some offensive line changes, and it seemed to be the answer, or the short-term answer, because then we went from giving up 9-10 sacks a game to 3, 4, maybe 5 at the worst. Some games, that we threw a 3-sack game in there, and it did really well. But it was interesting kind of seeing that, look, there hasn't really been that much of adjustments made at the tail end of the season, not only for the offensive line, but for the quarterback as well. And, the defense from San Francisco between, Bosa, Young, and all those cats, throw in with Warner and those guys at linebacker, that, they were just able to make that mass confusion for Howell and kind of make him ineffective, right? As Paul says, it's funny to see Chase Young, once he was traded, show a motor on every play. Show a motor on every play in DC. He was just MIA every week. He was, right? And the biggest thing that kind of went around was, look, and people are going to hate or be resentful of the fact that, he got traded because he was unproductive in DC. I get it. He had the ACL injury for a year and a half. Definitely affected his performance, definitely affected his attitude here in DC. But in the grand scheme of things, he hasn't really done anything per se like outstanding on an individual basis to like shine by himself out in San Francisco yet, right? Maybe it'll come next season. when he gets more acclimated to the team, gets more acclimated to his teammates, the playbook, yada yada yada. But it's not like he was going setting the world on fire, like to the extent of somewhat like Montez Sweat was in Chicago. So it'll definitely be interesting to see, what happens, where he goes in his journey with San Francisco, where we go, especially going into the draft that we're going to talk about here in the second half of the show, as far as our needs, and whether it's going through free agency, whether it's making a combination of the draft, yada yada yada. It'll definitely be interesting to track and predict, because we have absolutely no clue what our team is going to do. Everybody is speculating that next Monday we're going to be on that list, and it's a list that it's going to be our last topic tonight for tonight's episode. But I can't say I would be surprised if not as much happens next Monday as what people want it to. But I really do think that they're gonna clean some house, and we're gonna be on that list for next Monday. But before we get to the second half of tonight's show, we're gonna talk about our sponsors here at Out of the Box Sports. First up is our beloved friends at Monkey Cult Coffee, with their newest blend, organic, which is an organic blend, Peru La Florida, which also pairs well with their bourbon chocolate chip, toasted coconut rum, and a Sumatran blend. Use promo code OOTB Sports for your 10% off online at monkeycultculture.com for all of your coffee needs. Get your coffee cups, your coffee apparel, your coffee grinders and makers, and everything else. But more importantly, get one of those 4 great flavors in the bag form, shipped to your house. Use that promo code OOTB Sports to get your bourbon chocolate chip, toasted coconut rum, Sumatran blend, and their newest blend, the organic blend Peru La Florida. Log on, give those guys some support, because they support us here at Out of the Box Sports at Monkey Cult Coffee. Last but not least, our good buddy Jason Fine, attorney Big Al at 1-800-HURT-123. If you're like me in the DC area, regardless of whether the fact that he has 3 convenient office locations in Philadelphia, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and Pittsburgh, PA, so he's basically in enemy territory, he will help you out and represent you no matter where you're at. And trust me, if you're a DC fan like myself, you may need to call this guy up for some help. But Big Jason Fine specializes in motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workman's compensation, personal injury claims. He will gladly take on your case, help you try and get what you can to make things right, make things better. That's Jason Fine, a.k.a. Attorney Big Al at 1-800-HURT-123. All right, as we jump into the second half of tonight's show, one of the things that's interesting, it's kind of been making news here over the last, 3-4 weeks. I bet 3 weeks solid, is reports about players. And, whether that is, coups against certain players, whether it's EB or even Ron Rivera, or certain players being outspoken in their feelings towards certain staff that may have also contributed to the firing, when Jack Del Rio and the DB coach, can't think of his name right now, got fired on Black Friday. But, can you blame these guys, right? We have guys that, have been around the team since they got drafted. Basically the 2 most outspoken guys, and we're going to talk about both of them here, is Jonathan Allen, defensive tackle, and Terry McLaurin, wide receiver. Both of these guys are captain. Both of these guys have signed extensions with the team. So something somewhere along the line has convinced them enough to stick around, right? Whether it was Ron Rivera preaching to him, telling them how good things are going to be, promising them to make changes, get players to fill holes on free agency. They might not have a say in drafting, but trying to tell those guys that they're going to hit better on the draft, whatever the circumstances is. Both of these guys signed up for extensions, right? So basically, look, for now, let's be honest, they've given their heart and soul to the DC team, to the DC franchise. And, it's super interesting that they both, whether it's through post game pressers, whether it's through John Allen's weekly radio appearance on 1067 The Fan and the Sports Junkies every Tuesday morning, um, these guys have a desire to win. They have a desire to go out there and compete. They're tired of losing. They want the better culture, whatever you want to throw it out, right? So kind of where it gets kicked off this week was, we know Jonathan Allen uses his weekly radio appearance to kind of vent about some things and the way the organization may be going or not going for even more potent power, right? But post-game presser after the 49ers game, Terry McLaurin, wide receiver, offensive captain, had some pretty interesting things to say. So we know that allegedly, supposedly, whether or not it was 100% quoted and by the book, Chase Young and Montez Sweat, respectively, who have both been traded to different teams at the trade deadline, kind of came out and bashed Washington directly and indirectly, kind of for the culture, kind of for the way the organizations are run, the team perspective, kind of made it all encompassing, right? And Terry McLaurin, he's a positive individual. He's this year's Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the Washington Commanders. I've met the guy personally many times over the last 4 to 5 years, done autograph signings with him. Probably one of the best dudes on the team, actually next to Jonathan Allen, who I've also had some interactions with, even as most recent as this past offseason. That, he's honest, he's approachable, he always has a smile on his face, he always is going to give you 110%, he's always going to come to work, do his job, and, he knows the right way to vent, to express his displeasure, gripe, up the chain, not down or out, that kind of deal, right? But it was after another Commanders loss, this time the 27-10 loss at the hands of the San Francisco 49ers, that McLaurin spoke about another difficult game in the season as well. He said, quote, "It's definitely tough." He goes, you want to be a part of something that is sustainable and you're winning and competing at a high level. They've got a great staff over there in San Francisco. They've got great players. You can tell that they love playing together. I got to spend some time with those guys, like 6 or 7 of them at the Pro Bowl last year, and also training with them in the offseason. I really got to be around them. It kind of reminds me a little bit about Ohio State. And, between Bosa's and Chase Young and some of the other cats, they all played kind of at Ohio State in the same time frame, right? Just kind of keep that in mind. That's the kind of culture that they have and everything. You see why they have the success that they do. McLaurin, who was mentioning San Francisco's culture, reminded him of Ohio State, is similar to what Chase Young, that I just spoke about a couple minutes ago, said after his trade of the 49ers, right? So was McLaurin taking the shot at Ron Riveria and company for this year's team? I don't know. Maybe you're not, but it's not McLaurin's style to do that, right? So nor is it Jonathan Allen's style, but Jonathan Allen has been pretty vocal, whether it's the post-game pressers in the locker room, when he goes on his 15-second rants, or whether it's on his weekly radio show, right? So McLaurin didn't take it to the level that Jonathan Allen has, but, basically when Allen says that 3 weeks ago that, look, he's going to have to reevaluate everything after the season, and whether that means, even possibly demanding or requesting a trade, that, whether or not he's going to do that, I don't even know if that's 100% sure yet, but they're both frustrated with the losing. They're both frustrated with their role and, and the continued instability, at the quarterback position, right? Because that kind of drives where your team's going to go, how much the defense is on the field, off the field, yada, yada, yada. But can you blame him, right? I don't think we can. So McLaurin offered the last thing before we go off this topic is that when you're going against teams like that, you got to give and you got to play. Not perfect, but you got to make the most of every opportunity. You got to give them credit for building that team and the players going out there and executing the way they do. Hopefully I can be a part of something like that, but I'm just focused on myself, my world, and my journey. And I'm going to keep working to be the best player I can for this team. So, look, like I said, McLaurin's going to come in. He's going to do his work. He's going to give you the best production that he can. Hopefully, he gets the best production out of the quarterback to make him the best receiver that he can be, and he should be. But, it'll be interesting to see where that goes kind of moving forward with the stock that we have, right? As Paul says, hey, look, culture goes a long way in the NFL. I get the frustration and shots fired to the coaches. The coaches started the foundation. And you're absolutely right, because, as we're going to talk about here coming up in like 2 or 3 topics, Black Monday is next week. And that culture starts from the top down, from the owner to the GM, head coach, coordinators, coaches, blah, 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 blah. And there's a very good possibility that come next Monday, the only person left in Ashburn is the ownership. The players are still going to be there, but everybody between the owner and the players are gone. And it could be a very good, could be a reality like that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But, look, Jonathan Allen goes on his radio show and basically agrees with Terry McLaurin about his comments, after the San Francisco game this past weekend, and he says, look, he's very numb when it comes to the big offseason changes because he's experienced it all in the NFL. And, look, when you play for a team like our beloved Commanders, there's tons of changes that happen every offseason, whether it's coaching, whether it's coordinators, whether it's players coming, going, et cetera. It's all part of the annual change. But Allen did say, he's like, look, I would expect change coming to the organization this offseason. He wouldn't necessarily go on record to say how much change or to what extent, but he definitely expects some kind of change to happen to the team. He definitely doesn't think that Terry's wrong by any stretch of the imagination. And, he just wants to have that winning culture and a chance to be that winning culture back that, these guys should have, and like I said, if I were in them shoes, I would wholeheartedly want, to have that as well. So, it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens and kind of where we go as an organization after Sunday's game against Dallas. And, because look, we know we're not going to the playoffs. We know we don't have any postseason postseason tickets punched at all. We've basically, it's funny, but with the loss that the Commanders have suffered against the 49ers, we only have to wait week 18 to clinch our place in last place in the NFC East. We already did that. I kind of knew we did that about like 2 weeks ago or something. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where that goes. Hey, Eileen, thanks for checking in. Happy New Year to you too. Hope you had a good holiday season. Hopefully your teams are going to be doing a lot better than ours over the course of the next week and even into the off season. But what does that mean for us as we finish at the bottom of the NFC East for the second straight year? That means that we're going to play at the 4th place finisher level. It's, look, hey, looking at the 2024 NFL schedule, we don't know when we're playing teams and where at in the season, yada, yada, yada. But we know that we're obviously always playing, the NFC East twice. We also play the AFC in and of itself, even though we finished last in the NFC East. So, between the likes of Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, man, looking at that, unless you're on top of your A game with minimal injuries, there's a good likelihood that you may go 1-3 or 0-4 against that division in 2024. That division stacked just like the NFC East was 3 years ago. So it's super interesting. And then rounded that out, we got to play the NFC North next season in 2024 as well, basically to the tune of the Packers, Vikings, Bears, and I'm missing somebody, but yeah, the NFC North next season. So, but, then the discussion now becomes, do we have anything to play for in week 18? And, as we look at week 18, what do we look at? We look at a couple things, and as I like to preview, before I preview the next week's game, I kind of look at what they did the week before. And look, let's be honest, the Dallas Cowboys played the Detroit Lions on Saturday night. probably one of the better games, probably one of the better matchups, one of the better NFL games on TV this season, and that was this game, right? And it was funny because going into this game, Mike McCarthy, went on record to say that this matchup worried him the most, or he was the most scared for this matchup out of the entire season. It wasn't going against the 49ers. It wasn't playing the Eagles, or whatever. It was basically playing the Detroit Lions. And, look, as we're going to talk about it here in a couple of minutes, for all intents and purposes, the Lions should have won that game. But, the Dallas Cowboys squeaked out the 20-19 victory on a couple more questionable officiating calls at the end of the game. But we knew also looking at this game that, look, the Dallas Cowboys were home. The Dallas Cowboys play a lot better at home. And that's kind of what you get out of them, right? The one thing I will say before we go into the preview and bring in my special guest is that I was really hoping that Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys could have one more reception to help out my FanDuel minimal wagered possible big reward. It kind of is what it is. But, you saw a super feistiness in the Lions, as they're still going to the playoffs, and, the seedings could change as a result of week 18 and everything that happens. But, there's a pretty good likelihood some point in time, depending on how things play out, we could see this matchup again. And, look, without further ado, as we look at the preview for this weekend's Dallas Cowboys Washington Commanders game at FedEx Field, week 18, I'm going to bring in my good buddy Paul Spencer, host of Them 215 Boys show here at Out of the Box Sports Network. Hey, Paul, how you doing tonight?
Oh, there we go. Hey, how's it going, Steve?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. A little scared for this week, honestly. I'm not going to lie to you.
So tell me exactly why you're scared for this game. We kind of had a little chat before tonight's episode, but just so our viewers kind of understand where you're coming from and why.
Well, I know a lot of people say a win is a win, Steve. And, I was listening to the show, of course, here. And just like you said last week, one of the great games played last week, of course, Cowboys, Lions. But, I, as a fan, Steve, I hate seeing referees decide a game with a bogus call like it was last week. Dallas lost that game. And you're hearing a Cowboys fan say that. They lost the game. Clear, evident. That call was probably one of the worst calls I've ever seen in my life, where you see the number 70 covered on the offensive line there. Penny Sewell comes up, covers them. So no coach in the NFL is going to say, okay, we covered him. He reported eligible, but we're going to cover him. 68 Decker was wide open. He was uncovered. He was the one reported, but you lost the game. But Steve, honestly, what scares me is as we talked off camera, Cowboys could be 16-0 going to week 17. I don't care who you're playing. They could be 0-16. For some reason, Dallas doesn't show up in majority of the big games, and it scares me. You're playing with house money being a Commanders fan here. You have nothing to lose, everything to gain by knocking off the Dallas Cowboys, shipping them back down from 2-5. That's what scares me, and I don't care who your quarterback is. Look at Hal last year. One game he played last year, Dallas Cowboys. Look what he did, Steve. I don't want to see him. Let's bring in Rex Grossman. Why not? Help me out, Steve.
Oh, man, I'll tell you what, it's funny you say we don't have anything to play for, and it's super interesting that you bring that up because, like, I get it. Our players go out on the field and they try to play their best every game because they want to win. They want that victory more than anything, to not end the season on 4 wins or whatever. But, as we're going to talk about here after the preview, us winning and beating you greatly inhibits our chances to have the number 2 overall pick in the 2024 draft. So from a fan perspective, I'm hoping the Dallas Cowboys win, and it helps us kind of solidify that spot a little bit more. But aside from the fact that we always play interdivisional games better, especially the Cowboys-Commanders rivalry, whether it's in Dallas or at FedEx Field, which it is this weekend, you can't help but think about what happened last season. Now, it's completely different teams, at least for us on the Commanders side of things, different coordinators, some different players, a year of growth, blah, 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 blah. But I still see the same Dallas juggernaut coming into DC. And look, to me, when I look at you guys in your season, you guys have put together a really good, solid team throughout the season, not just on paper, but on the field.
Mhm.
Um, we do know for the most part, other than, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, Dallas does better at home than away. Does that bother you at all that you're traveling to FedEx for Week 18 with the NFC East title on the line?
It does, Steve. I mean, it's night and day. You could average 30 points at home, regardless of last week, but you play so much better at home. I don't know what it is, honestly. And to me, we talked about coaching. I think it's a lot of coaching there. If you can't be prepared on the road and getting your team ready to play, vice versa versus home and away, it goes to say to me like, okay, well, what is the issue on paper? You're elite? Yes, you have offensive, defensive players that are elite in both categories here as a team. But when you go on the road, Steve, and you can play the way you do, and I don't know what it is. To me, it's play calling, and it all starts with Mike McCarthy. A lot of my friends say, I gave him the pass first couple years, the COVID years, of course. This year was a make or break year. I get you get to the playoffs, but I don't play for participation trophies, Steve. I play for one thing called the Lombardi here. And if you don't get me to the promised land, you're no good to me. But a lot of my friends, they're actual NFL fans, regardless of what team they root for, they keep it in my head. They say McCarthy is going to be the coach that cost you games. Steve, there was that last week he could have cost us the game. There was some bogus play calling, run the ball, run the ball. But I'm scared. I really am. And playing at home is a different story. I'd be a little bit more happy. But playing on the road in a hostile environment here, I always say a wounded dog is the most scared animal to play against, and that's you. But I heard what you're saying about tanking, Steve. I don't see the tanking in a way I do, in a way I don't. But I don't know, Steve. It's just I can't grasp the situation of playing home and away. What the issue is with Dallas right now.
Yeah, when you brought up McCarthy and his play calling, it was super interesting because you talk about that, right? And when you look at last week's game against the Lions, you know whether it was the play calling or the Lions, good defense, your total rushing yards was 61. So,
Yeah.
you're kind of curious why McCarthy didn't draw up some more plays, whether it was to Pollard, whether it was, to the backup Deuce, whether it was, whoever.
Hmm.
I guess my biggest question, one of the questions that I have for you, it kind of goes into this week was the Dak Prescott CD Lamb connection last week a product of McCarthy's play calling, or was that can be sustained for this week, or was that just a fluke that CD Lamb comes out, catches like 200 yards worth of balls, and basically turns the Detroit Lions into Swiss cheese? So
I don't think it's just a weekly thing. I think it's we've seen it all year, Steve. CD Lamb is arguably one of the most elite wide receiver right now this year, productivity wise. Damn near, and I think 1,600 yards or 1,700 yards coming up for the season. Everybody's game plan to stop him. You can't stop. You can only contain him. You can't stop him, of course. But what you said about the running game, Steve, I don't know what's going on. As a fan, I was like, do we miss Zeke a little bit? That 20, the red zone runner there. To me, Pollard coming off the injury, he doesn't have the burst. He doesn't have the power to run between the tackles. Now, I did see, Steve, that there is a rumor that Dalvin Cook was just released, that they might go out and pick up him for the playoffs. But that does nothing for me this week. And if you can take away CeeDee Lamb, it's been shown that Dallas struggles when you take away CeeDee Lamb. Their next option is Ferguson. There's other wide receivers, Cooks, Gallup. They show glimpses and glamour sometimes. But, Steve, it's you take away CeeDee Lamb, that could be the X factor into losing this game if you can take him away. I mean, everybody's tried to, but it hasn't been successful yet.
Hey, as our good friend Bill Furman says, hey Steve, get us that Washington win this week. We got to have it. And I'll tell you, man, as a diehard Washington fan, I can't believe I sit here and say this, and I know Paul will chuckle and Bill will probably shoot me. Like, I am completely torn in whether I want the win against Dallas, which means absolutely nothing for me and our team other than to give us 5 wins this year, or we take the L and with a little bit of help from the Saints, secure that
Mhm.
second overall pick in 2024. But back to the discussion that you were talking about with rushing, like I'm looking at your stat board from the Detroit game, and
Mhm.
as we talked about only having 61 yards rushing, it was literally Tony Pollard, Dak Prescott
Yeah,
was your second leading rusher,
and CD on a
CD
jet sweep. Mhm.
CD Lamb with 5 yards too, and then Deuce Vaughn with 2 yards. So other than Pollard, like the rushing game was completely non-existent. And I kind of got to think that, Dak was doing pretty well,
Mhm.
as we talk about in Banner all season long, it's always the running joke always is, well, which Dak is going to show up?
Sure.
And, you had the better Dak show up against Detroit. So I'm curious, and maybe you are as well, which Dak is going to show up Sunday afternoon for the NFC East title game.
I think
One
he'll
that's going
show
to
up.
help us, or one that's going to help you.
I think the good Dak will show up this week. I mean, he's been showing that he can handle the pressure this year in big games. The Eagles, of course, the Niners. I don't even want to talk about that game, Steve. Definitely not. But there's been glimpses of glamours where he shows up at the right timing. Everybody says he can't win in December. Well, he's won a couple games in December here. Decide the games, but to me, it's the key thing this week, Steve, regardless of who you're having playing on the defensive side, is that running game. If we can't establish runs, you can bring down, you don't have to bring down the extra guy in the box because Dallas's run game is gone. There is no run game. And then you can key maybe that bringing down that, double safety and key into a CD Lamb because regardless of who you have on him, Steve, it's a mismatch for Dallas Cowboys. They're going to expose it. And I think it's definitely going to be a key to the running game here. If we can get the running game going, we could be, a deep in the playoff team here. But I'm really scared, even for this week, Steve. I know it sounds stupid, 13 and a half point favorites here. I'm still scared. I really am.
So and it might be the answer might be in my question, but with the NFC East title on the line, which is
Mhm.
why they flexed the game for Week 18, do you see the Dallas Cowboys starters playing the entire game?
Steve, as a coach, I always say momentum. I understand you're playing for, the number one seed here, but momentum means everything to me as a coach. You have to play your team. I understand there's always the evident, possibility of injury. I get that, but you got to go with momentum no matter what. I mean, I think to me, there's going to be a lot of screen watching. The Eagles, play at the same time the Cowboys do. I think there's going to be a
Mhm.
lot of screen watching. There's going to be a tablet or Jerry's going to have it on the big board. The Eagles score. I think Dallas, like I told you off camera, Steve, I think Dallas comes out, throws every play that they have in the playbook. I mean, from vanilla all the way to, Baskin Robbins 31 flavors this week. Everything is on the play sheet this week because this is a must win game because Steve, I understand the division, but you're playing for a little bit more than the division this week. If you're a Dallas fan, you're playing to be a home team versus a road warrior. That is a flip to me right there, where we have to play at home no matter what we do. Because on the road, you know what? I'm going to pack my bags and ready to go golfing, Steve, honestly.
So, from a Dallas Cowboys fan perspective, what do you think the Commanders need to do to pull the upset this week in Week 18 against your Cowboys?
Bring in Rex Grossman. No, I'm just joking, Steve. You know what? They have to take away what people have tried done. I mean, that's CD Lamb. If you can take away CD Lamb, it's clear and evident when you take away CD Lamb, this offense sputters. It doesn't sputter, Steve, but it looks totally different. You take away CD Lamb, Brandon Cooks shows glimpses and glamours, of course, in the slot. He's a good wide receiver, 1,000 yards the last 4 years, where regardless of where he's been. But Michael Gallup is nowhere to be seen. I mean, I'm not even going to
Mhm.
talk about him. The
Yeah,
running
he
game,
had, he had zero catches against the
that
Lions.
that's what I mean. Coming off that big contract, Steve, off the ACL injury, the ankle injury, they're paid him big time. He's nowhere to be found. Cooks is really your second to third wide receiver / tight end with Ferguson. But if you
Yep.
take away CD Lamb, Steve, the running game is not. I'm not worried about the running game. I think any team can get pressure on this and on this offensive line, regardless of who is there. Honestly, but I think if you take away CD Lamb and you make Dak Prescott beat you, going back to what you said, which Dak do we get? The progression Dak reading one wide receiver, it's not there, forcing the ball in bad situations. Or is Dak going to say, okay, take away Lamb? I have the other options. I want to see that. But you got to get this running game going as Dallas, but as Commanders, you got to take away CeeDee Lamb and just try to contain him. Maybe I don't know, Steve. I don't think anybody can do it right now, though.
I'll tell you what, you probably have one of the, let's be honest, probably one of the top 5 receivers in the league right now. And, what he did against a very stout Lions defense just makes it even more remarkable, right? And, the fact that he lit it up for 13 receptions for 227 yards and a touchdown, like, holy crap. Just anytime you can get over 200 or more is just amazing. And he's been able to tear it up. And it's just one guy. And you talked about it, a couple minutes ago that, he is basically the bread and butter and the option A, B, and C for the Dallas Cowboys offense. That, if for some reason he drops off, somebody figures out how to cover him or, basically kind of take him out of the game plan, then they might have a fighting chance. And, we'll kind of see what happens Sunday afternoon at, 4:25 at FedEx Field. And, it's, as we always say, one of the best rivalries in football. We both have a desired outcome, so to speak, and it might be the same. So, but we'll see what happens.
Regarding your defense, you're pretty banged up in the secondary right now. I know Fuller's on questionable. Juice is actually questionable as well.
Yeah.
Then you have 2 guys on IR. Both your backup safeties are on IR, of course. But Emmanuel Forbes, do you think he might get a little bit more time playing maybe the slot there? Because the slot's going to be the most key figure on your defense this week.
I think he will, mainly because I don't think he's progressed enough this season to warrant being in the cornerback position up against other teams' number 1, and he's a good kid. I think he has a lot of potential. He's got a lot of ceiling in where he's going to be as an NFL player. But, when you look at what happens when you put him up against the number 1s, Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown twice, the Denver Broncos wide receiver, and just on and on and on. The kid's not there yet. So, whether that means you put him, like you said, either covering in the slot or use him more in a nickel or something else and not strictly, cornerback-ish, or go so far as to say, hey, look, I know Del Rio was huge for this, and it might be something that is changing, is Del Rio was always big on not flip-flopping sides of the field. Yeah. So, based off, putting your number 1 QB or cornerback on the number 1 receiver. So, unfortunately that didn't help Forbes out because I'll use the Eagles, for example. What do they do if Brown is torching Forbes, in the first quarter, second quarter? Let's just keep him over there the entire game, because we know that they're not going to flip when they come out of the huddle to go, to the other side and cover Devontae or something like that. So, I'm actually surprised. I guess I'm not surprised, but I am. When you bring up the injuries on defense, but just overall team injuries, it was just so ironic that you can see, look, we're not going to the playoffs. We don't have anything really to play for at the end of the season. Just the amount of announcements of guys, this guy's going to the IR, this guy went to the IR, this guy went to the IR, and there's 3 of them. I'm like, holy shit. I didn't even know he was hurt, and these 2 dudes are going to the IR and they're done for the season, and I'm like, what happened?
Yeah. So, and the other thing, Steve, before I get out of here is what scares me most is EB, which he really hasn't shown this year. We all know he's the motion guy, the OC that loves the motion. And that's the other thing. If you look back at the games where Dallas struggled, there's a lot of motion. Detroit shows a lot of motion with the backs, that they have. Miami shows a lot of explosive backs, A-Chain, Hill, of course, Mostert in the backfield, dual running backs giving you motion. It could be a window dressing, Steve, but that's what scares me too. If EB comes out and says, you know what, hey, I watched the tape, Dallas struggles, they don't carry that corner coming across the field. They pass it off to a mismatch. And if the Commanders do that, that's something that kind of scares me too with Dallas too, because their corners, Gilmore and, of course, Deron Bland's playing lights out here, of course, as a team. But the secondary, Malik Hooker, Jordan Lewis, Donovan Wilson, has really not progressed the way they should, like over the top to help in the last back out of the season. So that's what scares me too, Steve.
And it's super interesting that you bring up EB because, it'll be interesting how he game plans, scripts, plays, blah, 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 makes adjustments. Because, look, it's his last chance to basically audition for possible season moves. And, look, you and I and all the other people watching tonight and NFL fans know nothing gets in the way of a good rumor, right? So, look, the NFL rumor train is already moving that EB is already being talked about in San Diego, in Chicago, and, you name the team that has the vacancy, and, he's already in discussion for head coaching opportunities. So, is he going to try and be a little more aggressive in his game calling and managing, how in the offense, because he knows that it's his last chance to, make that mark for a job interview? Or is he kind of reserved to what this season is and the fact that it didn't come out to the way we wanted it to, and, chalk it up as it is what it is, and we move on to 2024. So,
yeah, I mean, that's a great, assumption there, Steve. If he comes out and play calls like, a genius out there, that's just going to tell you, like, okay, number one, I'm auditioning. My job is on the line here. Screw the tanking. I don't want that second pick. I want my job. Or if I know I'm gone, I want that film tape saying, hey, you know what, next team, this is what I can do for you. You give me the time. I'll put in the work. But if he does go, Steve, I think a perfect place with him is, of course, maybe Chicago Bears. Justin Fields I don't want to ever put him in the Mahomes category. He's a mobile quarterback that can run the ball. And listen, they have, the 4th pick and the 10th pick right now, Chicago Bears. If it's me, I'm going out and get Marvin Harrison with the 4th pick, and then I'm going offensive line with the 10th pick. Give him the weapons, and that's what EB has, a solid line with Chicago, a good quarterback, DJ Moore, Marvin Harrison. Go out and get them. But I agree. If it's an audition, he's going to come out and just put, every play out there. This is going to be something spectacular to watch. But I'm hoping not, Steve. I'm really not.
So right now, there's Chicago's sitting at 1-10.
1-10. I'm sorry, 1-10. That's right.
They have Carolina's pick from the DJ Moore trade last year.
Yeah, they're already locked on.
So then the discussion happens, not necessarily for this show, but what do the Bears do with that first overall pick?
Mm-hmm.
The discussion's going to be all off season. Do they keep Fields? Do they move on from Fields? Like, what do they do? And of course, do they keep Eberflus? I mean, that's probably going to be the biggest decision,
right?
As far as what they do in the off season. But before we get going, what kind of score do you see happening on Sunday between our beloved Cowboys and Commanders?
Wow.
This is always the hardest part of every show we do, man.
It is. Of course, you always give a score with your heart, but you know what this game's all about, Steve. And you know what? I'm going to go Cowboys 31, Commanders 24.
31-24. So as much as I would love to see us pull out a win, just, the week 18 heroics, just like it was last year, the whole 9 yards. Unfortunately, I think the Cowboys are going to win. And, just because of where we are on injuries and things like that, I hate to say it but then again, it happened the first time around and I wasn't too far off. I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas puts up another 40 spot look, we're going to score. We're going to do a touchdown, probably a field goal or two. So I bet we're going to do 17, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a 42-17 game.
Wow. You know what, Steve? Every time that I talk to an opposing, host or a fan, they say that's the week Dallas shits the bed. That's the week. I don't know if you're playing that Bill Belichick mind trick here.
Rubbing his hands together.
I don't know if you're playing that mind trick on me, Steve. But you know what? I'm not buying it, and I'm not going to buy into it. It's going to be a close game, no matter what.
Hey, real quick before you go, tell our viewers and fans where they can find you at and your show.
Definitely. Thank you. It's Wednesday night, 9:30, myself, Dave, 215 Boys, of course, and also Thursday night's NFL Pick'em Show, where Dan and I actually pick all the NFL games, every week until the end of the season. And last but not least, myself and Bill Furman, College Football Frenzy, I tell you, we got a lot to talk about this weekend. To me, it arguably was probably the best BCS semifinal, both games that I've seen in history, down to the wire, both teams. And anybody out there that's not, doesn't believe in this, check out the show because I'll tell you what, the BCS got it right. The teams that you've seen this weekend were the best damn four teams out there. And I hate to say it, but you've seen the best BCS probably series in history. So thank you, Steve. That's where I'm at. And of course, guys out there, Out of the Box Sports Entertainment, all the shows we have, please like, share, subscribe, follow YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, Twitter. We're always out there. And Steve, thank you so much for letting me hop on here. It really had a good time.
Hey, no problem. I love having, guys and gals from opposing teams, especially interdivision, on the show, and as you know, I go on their shows sometimes as well. And, not only do we have the good friendships here in the NFC East shows that we do on the sports network, but where else are you going to get the better insight than, guys like you and Dave and Dan and company, that know their teams kind of like I do with the Commanders, and you're going to get that insight. And man, I don't envy you in your position this week. Between the NFL pick'em, as you and Dan get closer to the Super Bowl, the games are getting harder to pick. Between you and Bill on the college football frenzy, you're absolutely right. Yesterday's games were nothing short of awesome, magnificent, whatever adjective you want to throw in there. And I am super excited that yesterday's games were the way they were because they made up for the other 10 bowl games that absolutely sucked, or were blowouts. So, it was nice that, at least yesterday's games didn't, or I should say last night's games didn't continue the trend of what was kind of happening in the bowl game saga for 2023.
See, that's so true. I think there was something 50 some bowl games for the entire season. Every year, I sit there and I pretty much try to watch every game, not from beginning to end. But this year, Steve, honestly, I only watched so far 4 games this entire year. I watched the Notre Dame game, of course, since I'm a fan. Penn State because of Bill. We always talk about that.
Yeah.
And the 2 games this week. That's the only games that meant anything to me. The other games, transfer portal. You don't know who's playing, who's sitting out. It's just they got to do something. Either we want to get into that, Steve, because that's another 5-hour talk. But,
yeah, it is.
But Steve, thank you for letting me hop on here. I greatly appreciate it. If you're available, tomorrow night at 9:30, I know it's a little bit late where, of course, the Cowboys are always on prime time, 9:30 Wednesday night. If you're up, let me know. We'll invite you to that show, of course. So
yeah, I should be good by 9:30 tomorrow night. So we'll see what happens.
And Steve, also, your 2 little cats say hello to you. Maisley and Chloe say hi to you. Chloe's a little suspicious. She hides on me all the time, but Maisley's become my best friend.
That's awesome.
They say hi to you.
Well, thank you for coming on tonight, Mr. Paul.
All right. Thank you, Steve. I'll talk to you later.
Have a good evening. That's Mr. Paul Spencer, good friend, fellow show host here at Out of the Box Sports. And real quick, we got last two topics. We're kind of running out of time, so we're going to hit them real quick, but they kind of coincide with each other, right? In kind of some weird, messed up way. But the first, as we alluded to in the Cowboys preview and talking to Paul, is, what is the team really playing for here in Wake 18? Look, the players are going to tell you they're not going to tank. The players are going to tell you they go out there every week. They give it their all. They give it their 110%. They play their hardest. And unfortunately, in more times than not, especially for our team this year, the cookie isn't crumbling the way they want to. The cards aren't in the right order, right, for us to come out on top. Lost a couple games in overtime, lost a couple games, less than 2 points. I think the total is like 3 or 4 games less than 2 points. Probably 5 games less than 3 points this year. So games could have, our record could have easily been the opposite, where we had 3 or 4 losses instead of 4 wins. But what does this weekend do? What are the implications, right? So currently, as it sits right now in the 2024 draft, Washington currently sits, based on strength of schedule, difficulty, number 2 in the 2024 draft order, behind the Chicago Bears, which is actually the Carolina Panthers' first pick. But they got that in a trade last draft when they traded DJ Moore and draft picks and swapped all that shit around, right? So then number 3 is New England. Number 4 Arizona, and number 5 is the New York Giants, respectively, of which we got some Giants fans and co-hosts on kind of watching tonight as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they do at the number 5 pick. But with that being said, some of the things that's kind of super interesting is, what do they really do with that pick? What do they have? But the biggest question going into week 18 is, how do we maintain that number 2 overall pick? So, look, we're not necessarily suggesting tanking, but if it happens to fall that way, we're going to jump up and down and keep it going, right? So there are 5 games that are going to impact Washington keeping that number 2 pick for the 2024 draft. And they are the Bears versus the Packers, the Broncos versus the Raiders, the Texans versus the Colts, the Ravens versus the Steelers, and the Falcons versus the Saints. Now, the latter teams listed in all 5 of those contests are the teams that we need to win to basically help or tweak the strength of schedule based off of current records in the NFL. Now, one of the things I found super interesting is, for whatever reason, head to head does not necessarily count in draft order for the same record for the 2024 draft picks, right? So what do I mean by that? We beat Arizona, we beat New England, so you'd think that we would be like number 4, right? But it's basically record, of which we now have the same record as them, and then it's basically they skip head to head and go strength of schedule. So what do I mean by that? Right now, currently, strength of schedule sits like this: the Carolina Panthers, who we know are terrible, are sitting at a 0.52. Washington sits at a 0.515. New England sits at a 0.515 as well for number 3. So that's how close it is for these positions. Now, how much does that position really matter going from 2 to 3? Some people say it doesn't matter at all. When you have teams that can be perennially bad or annually bad that are drafting near the top, they all kind of are searching or need one thing, and that's a quarterback, right? So, the difference between 2 and 3 might not sound like a lot, but if there's a guy that you want to be or you want to shoot for to try and make your quarterback your franchise quarterback, then that one single spot move means everything in the world, right? So, back to that little discussion real quick. Why do we need those 5 teams? So here's the most important game out of those 5 is the Falcons and the Saints. And we need the Saints to beat the Falcons, which is more than doable, especially for the way that, Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke have been playing this season. Along with that, they got a lot of great offensive players. They just haven't been able to put it together this season for whatever reason, whether it's Arthur Smith, whether it's offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that Chick-fil-A isn't open on Sundays in their stadium. Who knows, right? Falcons just haven't been able to put it together. Can Derek Carr stay healthy for week 18 and put it together with Kamara and some other offensive weapons just to squeak out a victory? But essentially, that Falcons Saints game is worth 2 points in the strength of schedule. And because Washington played Atlanta and New England and beat them both, and, they got to play the Saints. So we need 3 out of 5 of those games to win the way we need to, with the Saints being the biggest. And if they win, it's basically kind of like a 2-point swing in the strength of schedule stuff. So, look, is the Bears and the Packers. We need the Packers. Could the Packers beat the Bears? Absolutely. It's going to depend on which Packers team kind of shows up. Raiders versus the Broncos. Broncos may have some new life with Jared Stidham. Who knows now that Russell Wilson's bench and that whole Seago. Raiders are playing awesome ball under interim coach Antonio Pierce. Raiders should win that game. Colts versus the Texans. It's going to depend on how well and if, in fact, C.J. Stroud plays in Week 18. Colts are also playing for postseason, circumstances. So, we need the Colts to win. They could win 50-50. Who knows? Steelers versus the Ravens. Look, let's be honest. The Ravens are on a tear. Ravens are playing the best ball in probably the NFL next to the 49ers at this point in time. But depending on if the Ravens sit players in Week 18, the Steelers don't have a chance. If the Ravens decide, hey, Lamar and company are all playing Sunday, at least the first 3 quarters, Steelers don't have a chance. If the Ravens sit players, Steelers got a fighting chance. And then the last game, the Falcons versus the Saints at the Saints down in New Orleans. We need the Saints to win, and I think the Saints will win. It'll be interesting to see what Dan and Paul say Thursday night on their NFL Weekly Pick'em show to see if how they pick those 5 games that will affect the Commanders' draft stock in 2024. So one of the things that kind of reflects that too is kind of interesting was, we were looking at, coaching vacancies and stuff, right? Ravens. Okay, here we go. So Paul says the Ravens announced they are sitting. The line is 12.5. Holy crap, 12.5 Steelers. Wow. Okay. So, right. So maybe my Steelers, I don't want to say my Steelers, but maybe the Steelers might have a fighting chance against the Ravens. I'm pretty sure that Tomlin has already come out and said that Rudolph, Mason Rudolph is going to be the starting quarterback this week for the Steelers. I saw something that some of the Steelers players are already getting behind Rudolph to be the starter. So I don't know if it was official yet or it's kind of leaning that way. But, hey, look, they're not playing Cleveland. Rudolph isn't going to get smacked in the head by Myles Garrett, so he should be good to go week 18 against Baltimore. And it'll be honest. Let's see what defensive starters are going to be sitting for Baltimore. And, is Patrick Queen going to be sitting? Is Humphrey? Is Hamilton? Maybe all those guys are going to be sitting. I don't know. But it'll definitely be something to watch, right? But, we kind of look at, what is going to happen to 2024. I'm not a big mock draft guy. I don't put stock in them. I don't do them. It's funny. I watch them and I watch what happens, when they pop up on my feed and, guys are, picking these players or trades or whatever. It's like, you have absolutely no clue what's going to happen in the NFL draft. You have no idea who's picking where, who's trading, whatever's going to happen. So if we end up with the second pick, that's going to give us ample amount of stuff to talk about. Excuse me. After next weekend until the draft weekend at the end of April. Every week there will probably be something. And look, Paul says if you look out and get the number 2 spot, I can't see you grabbing a QB. You have too many picks. Penix, second round. I think people are worried about his clavicle at the NFL level. I also saw a thing. Apparently he's got or had 2 bad ACLs. But for as many teams as need a quarterback, they don't see there's discussion about him even dropping to the second round, whether or not he's going to drop to the second round. In all honesty, I'll be honest, I was on the Howell train for the longest time. But, looking at his production over the season, looking at his consistency, look, I knew it was going to be a roller coaster season with Howell. I'm not saying we're quite at the ceiling of Howell, but we're not seeing what we need to see, especially for a second-year NFL player. I get it. It's his first year playing quarterback because he basically sat all of last season except for week 18. But, you got to wonder where we are the way we are. Second of all, he's not going to be the new regime's guy. And unfortunately, in a majority of times, the new regime doesn't keep that guy. So what do I mean by that? Is look, we know that, and that kind of leads us into our last topic for tonight. Next Monday is Black Monday, as it's affectionately called in the NFL. It's the day where NFL coaches, coordinators, staff members, between offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, etc., position coaches basically get their pink slips. And, that's when there will be, probably once again, let's be honest, probably anywhere from 5 to 8 head coaching vacancies along with coordinator positions. And, let's be honest, Martin Mayhew, Martin Herney, Ron Rivera and company will not be back in 2024. And as Paul says, I see Arthur Smith from the Falcons, Ron Rivera from the Commanders, Vrabel from the Titans. That would be interesting. And Bill Belichick from the Patriots, and many OCs not named, right? And that goes with the other current head coaching vacancies / interim guys, right? So we still have the Los Angeles Chargers opening. You technically still have the Raiders, even though Antonio Pierce is going to be the favorite for that. Um, I'm kind of interested about the Vrabel. Um, haven't paid attention too much to the Titans, kind of like insiders or network down there to see how much of a hot seat he's actually on. So I could definitely see that going either way. But other than that, the rest of your list is fairly accurate, right? So we're going to see, the average 6 to 8 NFL head coaching vacancies. So unfortunately, what I do see happening is A, Ron's gone, B, Martin Mayhew's gone, C, Martin Herney's gone. Basically GM, assistant GM, player personnel, whatever Herney's called. I don't even know. Jack Del Rio is already gone, so we know we're going to be getting a new defensive coordinator when new head coach comes in. The big question mark right now is going to be EB. I'm not 100% sold that EB has done enough to warrant getting the head coaching position here in DC. I definitely think EB is head coach material somewhere, whether that's Los Angeles Chargers, whether that possibly could be, at the Bears, if Eberflus is let go, if it happens to be replacing Arthur Smith for Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons down there in Atlanta, or somewhere else, maybe he's a good fit for Kraft up in New England. Who knows? I think this is the year that EB is going to become a head coach. I'm just not 100% sold that it's going to be in DC. So then basically that means, hey, we're cleaning house. We're starting from scratch. We're starting from the top. And until we get the GM and the head coach figured out in those two positions, probably more probable in that particular order, then, what we do at number 2 overall in the draft is pure speculation until then, right? We know we have so many holes, from offensive line to, linebacker to secondary to edge to, tight end to this to that. We do have 5 picks in the top 100, which will certainly help, having basically a top 3 pick in the draft. 2 second rounders, 2 third rounders. So basically our first 5 picks are in the top 54, 55 in the draft in the spring. We're going to have at least $90 million in cap space, which will help address some issues in free agency. Now that the ownership group has changed, with Harris coming on board, we are able to actually, attract and sign free agents to come into DC. So depending on who the head coach and GM will be, that could be a very enticing, situation for people to come into. Maybe not. So it'll be interesting to see what happens and where we go. So before we sign off tonight, next week's episode, we're going to have more off the field news. There'll probably be something that pops up, especially with, the way this weekend's game could go with Black Monday on Monday and coaching changes and who knows what. We're going to recap the Dallas Cowboys game that happens on Sunday afternoon. We don't have a preview game for the following week because we're not playing in the playoffs. So the majority of the second half of the show is basically going to be 2024 draft outlook, as well as a review of what I'll say will be yesterday for next week in Black Monday, and kind of go from there. So, I'm not necessarily going to say I'm agree with Paul, but go Cowboys, for our own individual reasons. And once again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. I know we went a little late, but it was a lot of material, a lot of good stuff, a lot of great stuff to talk about. Thanks again to Paul Spencer for jumping on and talking about the Dallas Cowboys and the Commanders game this week in Week 18 with some playoff implications. And as he said, tune in, College Football Frenzy, the NFL Pick'em Show, Dem 215 boys on Wednesday night, NFL Pick'em Thursday, College Football Frenzy tomorrow night as well. And with that, everybody have a good night, have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Good night.